Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady. I'd like to start by thanking our armed forces for what they do, both here at home and in many countries across the world. They are a credit to our nation. Bearing in mind the defence of our island must be any government's top priority, these debates are important, not least when we face a world that's as unstable as it's ever been in my lifetime. I note the title is Global Military Operations, which of course are 1, set by the government's priorities, 2, by what we can afford, and 3, by our obligations, not least to NATO. Having served in the armed forces for 9 years and been here for 13, 4 of them with the Defence Committee, I've seen Prime Ministers and some ministers struggle to clarify the scope and structure of our armed forces and to fund them properly. I exclude the current set of ministers who are doing an outstanding job. My criticism goes straight to the Treasury in the main. To be fair to the government, world events have a nasty habit of changing, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As yet another defensive review, a refresh of the previous one, highlights. And this while the world stands on the edge of an abyss, with another murderous war taking part in Europe and worryingly on NATO's borders. Since the end of World War II, we have not faced a top-tier opponent. But that threat is very real today, with both China and Russia raising the threshold. I quite accept that conflict on this scale will be fought with allies, not least the US. But, as a right honourable member on the opposite benches there mentioned the Falklands War, and let's hope we never have to go back there again. Many of my friends served when I was in 1982. But the question is, and certainly a question for I would have thought for the government, or any government, is, and that is one of our main dependents, can we retake it in the event they are invaded? That is the question. And if we can't, then clearly we are failing in our duty. But while the US gears up for major conflict, I do not detect the same sense of urgency here. To deter war, one needs to prepare and train for it, with sufficient mass to sustain a lengthy conflict. On this point alone, we must reverse the decision to cut the army by 10,000. Everywhere the Defence Committee has gone, although I can speak on my own behalf, I have heard our armed forces are stretched to breaking point. I said at the start of my speech that a government's top priority must be the defence of our island nation. That's essential, of course, but today we are talking about our global reach, which requires more funding for more planes, more ships, and more soldiers. It's clear from our evidence sessions that the pitiful 2% or just over of GDP spent on defence is not enough. It clearly is not. It was over 5% in my day, and the kits got more expensive and our requirements and obligations even greater. If we are to play our part globally along with our allies, as I've said in most cases, we must fund our armed forces to allow them to do the job that we in this place send them to do. It is our responsibility. We can't ask them to do things without the kit, manpower, whatever they need to do the job. Then we are failing in our duties. Global reach and influence are of huge significance, as China is showing. Too few politicians, regrettably, I think, have really understood the significance of a military presence around the world and the diplomatic and economic benefits that flow from it. An effective presence costs money, money which, again, politicians all too often divert to other priorities. I mentioned China, whose economic and military reach around the world are expanding at an alarming rate. They appreciate that the world's resources are not limitless, and to assure their security, these resources need to be identified, secured, and protected. The war in Ukraine, too, is a wake-up call, if ever there was one, and I pay tribute to the Prime Minister and his predecessor, and to all sides of the House who have stood together on this issue, and long may that be the case. Many European countries, not least Poland, Germany and France, are increasing their defence budgets. Political leadership is what we need badly if we are to fund our armed forces sufficiently to meet the inevitable rise in our global responsibilities. To be fair, our brave men and women are already operating in many countries, as we've heard, and very effectively and to their great credit, but greater mass is needed for the reasons I've stated. Looking back in history, we have a rather poor record on being prepared for major conflict, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The peace dividend that followed the end of the Cold War saw a major disarmament, to the extent we now struggle to find one fighting division where it needed, as my right honourable friend, the chair of the Defence Committee, has already stated. May I not, because I've got little time left and I know others on your side who particularly want to speak. And at the start of World War II, we had over 1,000 warships.
Order. Perversely, the debate is underrunning slightly at the moment, so having admonished the honourable gentleman earlier, if he does wish to give way, I think the House would understand.
In which case, may I reverse my decision? I'd be delighted to hear from him.
I'm very grateful. I just wanted to underline the point that he was making so eloquently to the House, which is the risk is even greater than the risk that he sets out, because global defence spending is now rising at between $200 and $700 billion a year, and therefore, if we want to keep pace with that, then defence spending is going to have to rise.
I hear the right honourable member, and of course it's true. And to be fair to our government, it's all bound down to the economy and how much money we have and everything else. But at the end of the day, it is a political priority on where you spend your money. And history, I think, shows, as I've already said in my speech, that for many years we have underfunded the armed forces to our detriment. And the start of the Second World War, thank heavens, we had a Royal Navy, as I'm about to say, with over 1,000 warships, which played a huge part, not least the RAF, of course, as well, in preventing the Germans from invading our country. So to underinvest in our armed forces at times where we think we don't need them necessarily, I think is a it's short-termism of the worst kind. And as history again shows, every single time a war breaks out, it comes from nowhere on many occasions, and many countries are taken by surprise. Or alternatively, MPs and others warn of conflict and nothing is done. On either case, surely we have to learn from history. So let me conclude. As I was saying, at the start of World War II, we had over 1,000 warships. We now have 17 or 18. I think it's 17, I think is the actual figure. And the RAF has been similarly emasculated. So talk of global reach and military operations is one thing. Funding them is quite another. Will I be refreshed after the refresh? I'm sure the narrative and ambition will be along the right lines, but they're easy. It's the political will, funding, and sense of urgency that are challenged if we are to take our global responsibilities seriously.
Thank you, Mr.